The fact of the matter is the industry in general, nonprofit has a workforce shortage because we are competing with not just other nonprofits, but with insurance companies, school systems, hospital systems, and paying fair wages is something that we struggle to do all the time. And we pay as best we can, but the realities are that you have to live within your financial means, because if you continue to lose money, you will no longer exist. Going back to when I first got there, a lot of what I spent my first few months doing was trying to figure out how to make payroll because the company was not doing well. You can only do that for so long before you will go out of business. I view it as my responsibility to develop a financial structure and to have the organization run in a certain financial structure that is healthy and profitable. And that is balancing the revenues that you have available to you with the expenses you incur. And that is a challenge that we all face.
Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Tessler, and we are here today with the Impact Collaborative having an extraordinary conversation with an episode that we have aptly named CFOs Are People Too. Steve, who is the Chief Administrative and Financial Officer for the Child Center of New York and the Impact Collaborative, jokingly said, Michael, CFOs are people too. And it made me laugh, but it also really resonated because, especially in the nonprofit world, we didn't always consider everything that goes into everything. And sometimes there's decisions that need to be made in order to ensure that communities receive what they need and also what they deserve. And so I'm so excited to talk to you, Steve, because admittedly, while I've been lucky enough to work in the nonprofit world, I've only very recently begun to understand all that really goes into the back end of making an organization run, and not just an organization, but making sure communities thrive. So, Steve, I'd love to start. Where are you from? What is your story? How did you end up in the nonprofit world?
So I was born and raised on Long Island in New York, in a town called Rocky Point, which at the time was very small. And it's actually a funny story how my parents got there. They were both my mom from Queens, my dad from Bronx, and they were living in Howard Beach at the time. They decided that they wanted to buy a house. So they basically got in a car and drove out on Long Island until they could find one they could afford. And it was Rocky Point.
Wow.
And so that's where I
My
grew
family
up.
didn't get that far.
Right. Your family got to Port Jefferson, which was about 15 minutes closer. That's how I grew up, and I managed to stay in New York my whole life, spent some time elsewhere, but, more to visit. How I got into the nonprofit sector. I grew up in a family where my mother was a teacher, and my dad worked for a government agency helping with vocational services for children with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I was kind of destined for this, really.
Yeah.
I grew up in a family of just helping people. And interestingly, my brother is also an executive in a large nonprofit, and my sister became a special ed teacher. So, the family roots are strong in the helping field. And, even though I'm a mathematician and I have my, MBA, I always wanted to do something that I felt good about every day. And when I go home, and helping people is always very important to me.
I love it. I love it. So as you think about your childhood and about just like little Steve Donowitz, is there a moment that you can pinpoint, whether helping a friend or seeing somebody in need or something that just sort of sparked, that gave you that feeling that sort of sent you on this trajectory?
I think one moment that I can think of is my father brought us to a Special Olympics of sorts on Long Island. And I remember just being amazed at what people do for others and how much it was important to him. And it just had a lasting impact on me that, that there are people that need help, and it's our obligation to help who we can.
And so I think it's sort of an interesting thing because when talking to a lot of people that end up in the nonprofit sector, there's usually this really compelling emotional desire to do good for the world, be out there in whether it's providing therapy services, whether it's running an arts or education program, whatever it may be. Yeah, what about the people that are passionate about numbers? How do they, where do they fit into that equation? I think it's such an interesting thing that, you're a mathematician, somebody that, pardon my phrase here, but a freak in the spreadsheets. Why and how did you connect the dots that you could use those skills in the way that you use them?
I think it was just I was always naturally inclined towards this left brain ability. It always came naturally to me in school, and it was just something that I knew I was good at. And so it seemed logical to me to, forge a career path in that field. But right when I got out of school, like many people, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And a friend of the family had gotten me an interview at the New York City Office of Management and Budget. And I spent 5 years working there early in my career, and gained some really good insights into how government works, the good and the bad. But I learned a lot about budgeting, about social services, about, how governments work in a sense from a fiscal standpoint. At that point, I realized I really didn't want to work in government anymore, but wanted to do something different. And so I ventured into social services and spent the rest of my career there for decades.
I think it's so interesting, especially in the world of budgets and spreadsheets and sort of the reality of allocation. How or can you recall sort of a moment, the first time that a line item on the budget to you equated to a human experience or a person's reality?
So very early on, I think that's one of the things that from my early days of being a budget director, I understood what these numbers meant, that it wasn't just numbers on pages, and it wasn't just about managing the finances, but they're representations of what the operations do. And so I worked very closely with operations for my entire career. I actually coined a phrase, finance is your friend. And I got a lot of laughs out of it. And I like to use humor a little bit, particularly in serious situations. But it was to break the ice because, administration in nonprofits and probably elsewhere, but they're not always viewed so positively. It is our responsibility to ensure the health of the company and that, money is spent wisely. You tend to have to focus on that, but it's always important to remember why you're there. It's not just about a job and not just about the numbers.
And when you're sort of in those situations where, you have sort of a macro vantage point of an organization, and for context, so the Child Center of New York, it's been around for over 70 years. It started as many community-based organizations do. It was small, it was scrappy, it was local, and it was holding on for dear life in terms of resource allocation. And I'd love if you could sort of paint a picture of when you first arrived, sort of what was the real reality of it all, and now where it is today, and even being able to maybe connect that thread back to, it's really easy to want to say yes to everything because Lord knows there's no shortage of need and there's no lack of desire to give out said resources. The balancing act of the fiduciary obligation to ensure the long-term health of the organization sort of puts you into this interesting quandary where you really have to be strategic and you have to learn to say no to what sometimes I imagine feels like things that are impossible to say no to. So, but talk us, let's go back in time a little bit. So it was 10 years ago?
11 years ago. So when I was recruited by Traci, what she said to me was, the Child Center of New York's clinical services are incredible. The back office is a mess. I remember she met me at one of our early Head Start programs, which They're little kids. Who doesn't like little kids, right? My mom's teacher. By the way, my wife's also a kindergarten teacher. So I'm ingrained in children and, appreciating those things. So we met there and I was like, this is incredible. Little 3 and 4-year-olds running around. And so I was really interested. I said, hey, can I see the main office where we're going to work? And she just kind of gave me a look. I was like, uh-oh. So we walked a few blocks to, let me paint the picture. The corporate office was in Woodside, Queens, in the basement under a dollar store. And the windows were up here. So, and we had people 3 and 4 in an office. And so, of course, what I did, I said yes, right? At the time, I had 3 young children, and why not take a crazy risk, right?
Such a crazy thing when you think about the context of somebody who is all about risk aversion and making wise financial. That's so funny.
And it is kind of funny too, because I was actually being recruited for another company that was a very well-established company. And it was the trade-off of, what do I do? Do I take the sure bet, or do I go to this company that is what I understood was struggling? Yeah. So of course
on the verge.
Well, I didn't know that at the time I was making the decision.
They always leave those details out. Huh?
I mean, I did look at the financials, risk averse. I understood there was some serious issues. Once I said yes and dug into it, it was worse than I knew.
How did your wife take that?
Well, the 16-hour days, and I'm not exaggerating, didn't necessarily sit well, but she knew that I've always been the type of person that just works till the job's done. And when I say yes to something, I commit to it. Yeah. And so, we spent, actually, it was very interesting. I showed up, and my 3rd day there, I had to go to a finance committee meeting and tell them that, no, we did not have $340,000 of net assets. We had to take a write-off. And there were only $7,000 in net assets for this $32 million company.
I'm thinking about the folks in the audience who might not necessarily understand when you say a $30 million budget, like, what does that actually equate to, or what does that actually even mean? Are you saying the programs cost $30 million a year and you're bringing in $30 million from donors, or you're bringing in, what's the...
So the Child Center of New York is a social service agency. $30 million is the annual budget. That means the programs and services and the cost of running the company is $30 million a year. And presumably you want to have at least $30 million of revenue to go to offset the expenses.
And so when you say revenue, it's something of a misnomer for folks. Like, revenue being that is, you're hosting your gala, you raise your money, or you're doing whatever, or where is that money coming from typically?
Sure. So for the Child Center, 93% of the revenue comes from the government.
Wow.
And that's either in the form of contracts, meaning the government will contract with you for a set of services, and they pay you for the cost of the service. But the way the government functions in these contracts, they will pay you up to the value of the contract. So if you get $1 million contract and you have $1 million of expenses, you break even. If you go over that, you lose money. They don't pay you the extra. If you go under, you only collect what you actually spent. It's the fine point of spending as close up to the maximum.
And when you spend that money, that's and that covers what is the cost of the program itself, or what that is. Nothing on top of that. It's not like you can get, I'm just going to use an arbitrary number, $100,000 from one of these government sources for a contract, and you come in under budget and what you've delivered with the services. It's not like you get to keep that and hold on to that and use it for others.
Not at all. And however, another portion of the revenue stream is what we call fee-for-service revenue, which is insurance to the layman. It could be, commercial insurance companies. It could be managed care companies or Medicaid.
And is that money excess, like, can that be spent in other ways or sort of?
Unlike a contract where you're paid for the expenses you have, here you're being paid for a service you deliver. So if you think about a therapy session, whether you're going to a child center or to an individual therapist,
Sure.
you pay them, or the insurance company pays them for the value of that service, whatever the agreed upon rate is. Your expense structure is your own, and you have to stay within all of the regulatory requirements to run the company or to run that program.
Sure.
But in those examples, you can theoretically make money, meaning sitting profit.
So I think it's just such an interesting, I mean, I look at like the big companies that are out there in the mental health space, for like, I think of like BetterHelp, for instance, which is sort of acting in a capacity similar to what, you're connecting people that are in need of a service with a service. In their case, there is no insurance element. They're just doing a cash exchange. They're bringing in a profit. And in a way, you're also bringing in a profit. The only difference is the shareholders, who are you ultimately responsible to? The shareholders at a company like that are a group of people that are looking to get a return on investment. Whereas your shareholders are and tell me if you think differently, are the communities that you serve. And what you're trying to really do is how can you get the best return on impact?
100%. So there are no shareholders making profits on an organization. Now, there is this misnomer that nonprofits mean no profit. And that is just not a true statement. I mean, there are nonprofits that lose money, but
what's the balancing act, though? Because, something I'm always sort of curious about is you look at some small mom and pop nonprofits, and a lot of times the people in charge aren't taking any money. 90% of the staff is volunteer. Is there, within the industry of the nonprofit sector, is there sort of an understanding or a sort of a baseline equation of like what justifies a particular salary amount or what, how do you sort of, because you still need to attract the best talent, right? Like any business, it's a competitive space in a competitive world, which means you need to be able to spend money in order to provide a quality of services that your shareholders, your communities deserve. So what is that?
It's a tough balance, right? The fact of the matter is, the industry in general, nonprofit has a workforce shortage, because we are competing with not just other nonprofits, but with insurance companies, school systems, hospital systems, and paying fair wages is something that we struggle to do all the time. And we pay as best we can. But the realities are that you have to live within your financial means, because if you continue to lose money, you will no longer exist. And going back to when I first got there, a lot of what I spent my first few months doing was trying to figure out how to make payroll, because the company was not doing well. And so you can only do that for so long before you will go out of business. So it is, I view it as my responsibility to develop a financial structure and to have the organization run in a certain financial structure that is healthy and profitable. And that is balancing the revenues that you have available to you with the expenses you incur. And that is a challenge that we all face.
Do you find that for like an organization like yours that, obviously 99% is a pretty hefty number from sort of a particular source of funding. I feel like some folks are gonna be watching this, try to wrap their heads around, what goes on in the back end of nonprofits. How does it really operate? But I think other folks are coming at it from trying to figure out, what are the secret ingredients, the special recipe to finding that balance and sustainability. And it's sort of an interesting, how do you continue to figure out sort of new, interesting ways to supplement especially at a moment like this, like regardless of politics or where one stands on the spectrum, there is no denying the fact that how funding is happening in the nonprofit world is changing at a pace that most nonprofits are struggling to keep up with. So how do you keep the ship steady during those times?
So I think it's not just thinking about what you do in those times, but how you plan over time for them. And like I said, when I first got here, we were $32 million annual operating budget. Um, and very strategically over the last 11 years, we have grown our business where we have 11 straight years of profitability, meaning surpluses and growth. And they go hand in hand because you can grow a lot, but if you keep losing money, you're just going to be in your death spiral. And that's something that we're very proud of, is the ability to grow our business.
How big is the business now?
Our budget for next year is going to be about $115 million.
And you started at
32 million.
And this was how long ago?
11 years.
Okay.
So it was steady growth. And what it was steady growth, right?
Yeah, but it was sustainable growth.
Sustainable growth, but also there were two ways that we knew, and I knew we had to grow. One is we had to diversify what businesses we ran.
And when you do that, is there, so I can understand sort of the intent, obviously there's a desire to help as many people as humanly possible.
That's always at the root of what we try to do.
But built on top of that is an understanding that some funding mechanisms for some things may disappear or may ebb and flow. But when you have am I sort of on the right track of
100%? So the idea being that by diversifying the types of services you run, the funding that supports those comes from different places. So particularly, we are very heavily New York City funding focused. So, but if you're in one type of program, all your funding is generally coming from one agency and one revenue stream through the city or the government, however you're funded. By diversifying and having different business lines, so we run, early Head Start and Head Start programs. We have behavioral health clinics. We have a residential site. We run youth development programming, which is partnering with the Board of Ed school systems. We have in-school and after-school programming. By building out these different business lines, which we now have 6, by the way, we doubled the number of businesses. It spreads out where the money comes from so that as government priorities shift, yes, you may lose some money in one business line because of that decision, but then you have the ability to pivot and you may benefit in other business lines.
And supplement where those voids
and supplement,
are.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's how you can balance the government shifts a bit. The other thing that we really focused heavily on is not only looking at the types of businesses, but what types of revenues. And I mentioned the government contracts versus our insurance money, Medicaid, et cetera. We were very heavily in government contracted, which is that break even or lose money financial model, essentially.
Which gives no room for error or growth.
It gives very little room. If you have to have extremely tight expense management, so you're not going over budget and losing money, but you have the security of having your costs covered up to that point. So there's a balance.
Something that I often sort of wonder about, and I think sort of gets to the heart of this CFOs or people too, is that it's very easy for you to be cast as sort of the villain. Because at the end of the day, you need to make a decision, and that decision does impact people. And the decision can be well-intentioned for the long term, but it doesn't necessarily change the short-term reality for a lot of folks. And so I want you to imagine just for a second, I'm a frontline staff member. I am in the trenches every single day. We are under-resourced. We are overwhelmed. We are hearing stories and working with folks that are dealing with the unimaginable. And we had to put in a request for a slight budget raise so that we'd be able to have the resources we need. And you said, we can't. I realized that there's a lot of intermediaries between you and that frontline staff member. But if you could tell them and say anything to them as they express that frustration, what would you say to them?
One of the things that I try to go by is say yes when you can and no when you have to. It is my responsibility. It's not always an easy decision.
So if you had the opportunity to have a conversation with one of these frontline staff members, the people who are out there day in, day out, they're under-resourced, they're overwhelmed, they're helping people who are experiencing, in many cases, the unimaginable, and you're not able to approve their budget, and they never get to talk to you. They don't necessarily get that one-on-one interaction. There is all this sort of, all the many layers between. If you had the opportunity to person to person, human to human, talk to them and tell them something to explain and to understand what they're going through, what would you say?
Well, I think, it's important for everybody to understand that, like your own personal finances, you have to live within your means. What we do is we try to do as much as we can. And one of the things that I did early in my career and I've instilled in Child Center is it's not the finance department making the budgets. It's the operations, right? And we have to make joint decisions. This is a collaboration. And in order to do that, there's the accountability, which is we share the responsibility of developing budgets and having, when I'm using budgets, it's how many people can you have? How many resources can you have? What types of, non-people costs, whether you're doing events or transportation for travel, for, client events, things like that. It gets decided jointly. Now, there are some that you can't balance, and we strategically will be okay underwriting some of these programs. And we have a handful of them, but you can't do it to a lot of them because, again, if we're not being responsible, none of these programs will exist. And we've seen it too often where nonprofits go out of business because of it.
I feel like it could be very easy to feel removed from, the work. How do you stay grounded? How do you stay connected to what's happening there on the front line?
So I've had the privilege of, in my prior job, taking the opportunity to run operations. And I ran all of the adolescent services for this company in New York State. So I have firsthand knowledge of what it takes to run a business from that side of the business.
Yeah.
And I gained a lot of insights into it. So I know what they go through. I've lived it. I've experienced it. And I'm also rewarded by it because I got to really work with line staff, and I've also got to work with clients. And to an extent, I still do. And that goes to what.
That's a personal choice, less so required by the role, but a personal decision to be that connected and to be that on the ground. Because I guess because I just in observing how you do it, you really are so. There may be many technical bureaucratic layers between you and the frontline staff, but the reality is you've made it a point to spend time with them and to listen and is there any advice that you have for anybody that's in a similar sort of C-suite level role that?
Sure. And it's not just C-suite, it's any administrative person. And this is something that I've required of staff, and begrudgingly staff have done this. I make the administrative staff go to the programs. Not often. I try to get them to go more often than not, but it's so invaluable for somebody who is the behind the scenes, as you say, spreadsheet developer, to understand what the day in the life of the operations is, because it changes your perspective. where it's not numbers on a page. It's the financial structure of people helping people. And it's fascinating because every time they do end up going, and it's not that often, I try to get them there much more than they do, but every time I'll send an accountant, for example, to a program, they come back and it's
This is a different type of energy.
a different type of energy, and they share it with the other accountants. So, and that's not just accounting. I oversee all of administration, so HR, IT, etc. And it is so important. Like, I think every CFO should require this of their staff. It connects them differently. Even if it's, I know it's a pain because now you're spending half a day not doing your job, so to speak. But
how invaluable is it to understand how these numbers on a spreadsheet equate to a human experience and one's ability to deliver these services and to do good. I think that's such a, especially, and because I think this touches on something much bigger, because it's not just finance, it's not just administrative, it's not just nonprofits. It's, we live in a time, in a world, especially filled with the technology that we have access to, where it is so easy and so quick to become disconnected from those who exist in the world. And we can see things, we can read things, and we're sort of numb to it. And it can be as simple as reading a news article. You're scrolling through TikTok and you watch a video, and eventually you're just so overwhelmed by it. It's easy to forget that behind the text, behind the number, behind the video, there is a person and a reality that is worthy of all the attention and all of the focus in the world. And I think as we talk about, CFOs are people too, what a challenging, but also what a beautiful sort of obligation, what a solemn obligation of it is figuring out that balance and saying we need to think like a business, not because we want to make money, but because the only way that we can give folks what they need, the resources they need, is to enact these sort of wise fiduciary practices. CFOs are people too, but CFOs are in the nonprofit sector, you are keeping communities going. And an organization that doesn't have somebody that balances, because you have one or the other extreme. If you're overly extreme in not being able to see the people, you're removed from it, and the reality is the services that are being delivered aren't actually delivering. And in contrast, if you allow your emotions and you allow the reality of the situation to sort of blind you from that obligation, then you have an organization that fails. And nobody wins if an organization is out of business. Everyone loses. Staff, communities they serve. I have nothing but respect and adoration for your field and for what you do. And I think there is an opportunity in this moment as the nonprofit sector is really experiencing this shakeup to kind of recontextualize how important it is for, I'll be honest, having known you for a little while, you could have gone in any number of directions with your career. You could have been running a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund. You could have used your talents and your skills for anything, but instead you have chosen to take all those entrepreneurial instincts and to apply it to something that every single day, hour after hour, whether you're awake or you're asleep, you are making an impact. And I think for people to be able to see, especially I think about, the young entrepreneurs, the young finance minds, the young technology minds, all these people that have a desire to go in the private sector, make their money, cash in, and demonstrate their talents and capabilities. If they listen to this and they hear you talk, they see that you achieved more than most entrepreneurs will ever achieve in a lifetime. That you are you have been able to take these passions, take these skills, and apply it in a way where it's not just about that return on investment, about that return on impact and the people that are there at the end. And I think that what you do is spectacular, and your entire team. And I think that all those that are in your position that are figuring these things out and also have to take on the role of sometimes being perceived as the bad guy in order to do what is best for all. That is the arguably in a field of selflessness is the most selfless thing of all. Take that particular.
I guess I don't see it as selfless, but I see it as, it's something that gives me satisfaction when I put my head on my pillow every night, that I am doing something that I love, that I'm good at, that helps people. And most days it's fun. And, so I spent my career, I appreciate what I've accomplished, but I also appreciate that I am helping the company thrive and helping lead this company in a way that will ensure that many, many more people are going to get help.
That is exactly why CFOs are people too. Thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and join us for other really amazing conversations, whether about social impact storytelling or about how the entrepreneurial spirit can help feed into the impact work that keeps our world and our communities moving. Steve, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Let's do it again soon.
Absolutely.